Okay, hello and welcome to this webinar on being working class in clinical psychology. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if you're here for the first time, it's really lovely to see you. Just for a bit of context for people who are new, I think these webinars started just as a place for people from a working class background just to discuss what their journey through the profession had been like, particularly with the aim of, giving encouragement to other people coming into the profession. I think as time's gone on, there's been a lot more interest in looking at all the kind of different aspects of being working class, whether that's kind of race and other things. And so we're trying to expand a bit more around that. So today we're going to be talking about visible and invisible difference. We've got a lovely selection of speakers lined up today. And I think they're going to each speak for about 10 minutes, after which you can give some questions. I think after we're about halfway, after about two speakers, we'll probably take a bit of a break and then come back. And then once we're done with all of them, hopefully we can get a bit of a Q&A. And so if I could just ask if people can just put their cameras and mics off just to stop a cacophony happening, that would be great. But, we really do want your kind of feedback. So if any questions you've got, note them down in chat. We'll try and get to them. Feel free to tweet about this. I think the hashtag is #ClassInClinPsych. And, just to be mindful that everything's being recorded. So even if you put a question down, make sure it's something that you're okay with. And, I think the people we've got along today, they've given up their free time. So please just be excellent to them and show them some love. Julie, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that was a brilliant intro. Yeah, nothing to add.
Okay, cool. I think our first speaker is Laura, and I think Laura will introduce herself, and she's got a lot to say.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity for me to talk about my disability. I'm Laura. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work in learning disabilities. I thought it might be helpful to give you a bit of context as to my journey with a disability, and through being diagnosed all the way through the job opportunities, the pre-training opportunities, and kind of touch on my experiences of training. So I was diagnosed with a health condition very early on in my teens or pre-teens. It was an invisible disability. Yes, I had relapses, but if you looked at me, you probably wouldn't know that I had a disability. So for a long period of time, it was an unvoiced disability, and it was hidden because you didn't know that I had a disability. And what's interesting is I didn't actually know until in my 20s that this health condition was actually classified as a disability. So for a period of time, I didn't speak about it. I didn't tell anyone about it. I went through school not knowing that I just thought I had an illness, that it would go and come back. But it wasn't until I got into probably university where I realized that I was constantly writing about and declaring this illness. And I thought, okay, it's not like an immunization. Like, I'm not asking, have I been immunized for this? They were specifically asking me, do I have a disability? And I would constantly say no, because I didn't know it was a disability. But it wasn't until, again, with every transition, you leave home, I moved out of home, went to another city, that I found myself, I had to start talking about this disability because I was having relapses in university. And I realized that I didn't have my support of family. I needed to hold the support of my friends and other students. And that's when I started to talk about this hidden disability. So I went through a stage of having a hidden unvoiced disability to now a hidden voice disability because of the context that I was in. And I think once I started voicing that I had a disability, it kind of started to challenge those misconceptions or those thoughts of how people feel about me. What would people say about me if they knew I had a disability? But actually those conversations got easier, the fact that I started talking about my disability. And there was something about, I realized that once I felt comfortable talking about my disability, conversations about my disability also became more comfortable. So it then became a hidden voice disability. I was just like, okay, I have this. And I think with that comfortability came confidence to say, I want to go and talk and tell you that I need help. I want to go and tell you that this is my disability, this is how it affects me. And also when I do have relapses, it made it easier for me to seek help. And also, so once I left training, I felt a bit more kind of confident to speak about my disability, and especially when it comes to applying for jobs, especially when I had relapses, I realized that the fact that I was feeling comfortable talking about it, people were able to ask questions about, are you okay? Do you need support? And obviously, I'm not going to lie, it got frustrating, it got irritating, because I think I've always been someone who's never been defined by my disability. So yes, I have a disability, but that's separate to who I am as an individual. So I will still work hard, I will still get to where I want to get to. We're all in clinical psychology, so we know the demands and the competitiveness and the stress of trying to get to where you want to be with the goal of getting to clinical. And that made it easier talking about it. And then only a few years ago, my hidden disability that was voiced now moved to a visible disability voiced, because I had a big relapse and it required me to now require some support. But that didn't faze me. I think for me, I think I'd already built that confidence to be able to talk about it. And now I started to realize that I want to talk about my disability, but I started to notice that people didn't want to ask about my disability. And that frustrated me. I was very much, for instance, you see me with, let's say, some support with walking. Why don't you ask about my disability? What's stopping you from asking? And it made me realize that if I didn't feel comfortable or creating a space where people could ask about my disability, it's no surprise why people will feel frightened to be curious and ask about the disability. So I think it's a journey that I've gone through. And I think from a culture of not being able to talk about disabilities anyways, it kind of made it harder for me to openly kind of say I have a disability. But through my experiences of talking, having amazing supervisors and having amazing peer support to be able to share those journeys and those challenges with me, gave me confidence to be able to openly say, I have a disability, this is how it affects me, I want to talk about it. Please feel free, if you have any questions, to ask me about it. And I think for a lot of the people that I work with and colleagues, me creating that space to say, I want you to ask me questions. We're therapists, we'll always be curious. Why are we blocking that curiosity pathway? If there's anything you want to ask, please feel free to share. So I've always kind of said, I think personally, my disability has helped shape me as an individual. I work in a learning disabilities context, and I've received amazing support through my lived experience of disability. And that's the same support I want to share with people who do have disabilities. And there's something about, if we're not able to openly talk about it, then we're not able to mirror that pathway with our clients that we're working with. So for me, this disability that I've gone through with my lived experience has definitely shaped me as a strong therapist, as someone who wants to advocate for disabilities, but equally more so as someone who wants to say, we're happy to work with disabilities, but let's bring it closer to home. There are therapists who have disabilities. Why are they not being voiced? Why are we not talking about our hardships? Just the same way that there are barriers and challenges for certain groups like LGBTQ or ethnic minorities and everything, it's the same barriers that people with disabilities go through, the same challenges, the same hurdles. And it's not the fact that we can never get there. We just have to be very mindful of our limitations and just know that, okay, this is enough for me. I might need to step back a bit. And I think that's something I learned through my journey through assistance, my travels through London, my university journeys, that our disability helps shapes us, and it kind of gives us a different perspective in life to know, yes, we have limitations, but it definitely doesn't stop us from reaching our goals. Absolutely. And it's evident the fact that we have therapists here talking about their journey with a lived experience. So it's not impossible. It's something that we just have to be mindful that our journey might take a bit longer, because we will always go through hurdles of whether it be a relapse, whether it be a health condition, whether it be sickness. That's all fine. That's natural. And that's a part of having a disability, but it absolutely does not stop anyone from reaching their goals. So that's my passion, to kind of advocate that you can be whatever you want, but it starts from within. You have to accept that you do have a disability. There are going to be barriers, there are going to be challenges, there might be hurdles, there might be mistakes or failures. But for me, those mistakes, failures, hurdles, challenges are the greatest learners in life, because you learn a lot through those opportunities. So that's the message and take-home message that I want to pass on, that absolutely no one's ever defined by their disability. You are separate from your disability. You just have to be aware that you might have limitations in terms of getting to where you want to get to, or it might just take you longer, but that's okay, because your pathway's there. Instead of running to a pathway, you just walk, but it doesn't mean that you won't ever get to that finish line. So for me, my journey has its ups and downs, but I'm sitting here now and talking with you to evidence that, and to speak to you to say nothing is ever impossible. With or without a disability, you can always get there. Just be mindful that there are limitations, and also to look after yourself, because I think that's my biggest challenge, and especially with COVID, it has been difficult for people with learning disabilities generally. We know that people with long-term illness, with disabilities, with health conditions, they have been indirectly affected by COVID. Absolutely. And I think it's something about be kind to yourself, look after yourself, but absolutely keep going, because you can get there. I'm just mindful. I think I did my speech in under 10 minutes. I was a bit kind of worried that I was going to over speak, but I think I managed to get in there.
No, I think you nailed exactly 10 minutes, Laura.
Definitely.
No, thanks for that. It's kind of really powerful reflections there. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to kind of ask Laura about what she said? So there's lots of appreciative comments in the chat section. And what was this? So someone's asked, how do people manage needing more sick leave at times, and stigma concerns about taking too much?
Yeah, that's always something I was mindful about, the sickness, and especially in terms of the hospital appointments they have to go to. I was always worried that if I had hospital appointments, because I have a long-term condition, that inevitably I will have a lot of hospital appointments. And I think for me, the support, having a really good support, but equally knowing your rights is crucial, because if you have a long-term health condition, and again, I'm not going to generalize because every individual trust is different, but my understanding that long-term health conditions is separate from your sick leave, because it's a long-term health condition or because it's a disability that requires you to constantly go for check-in and everything. So I understood that that's separate from taking your annual leave, but you always have to be open with your manager, be open with occupational health, be open with the system to say, this is how I need to look after my health, and it requires me going in. And if it means that you have to do extra time, then so be it. Sometimes it just might be fine, I will do a couple of hours here to make up for time, but please don't be pressurized or worry about the sickness, because you have rights in terms of you need to take care of yourself. You need to look after your health. And for me, a system that doesn't allow that is a failed system, and that's where you get discrimination. They need to cater for and adjust for your needs.
Oh, absolutely. We've just had another question in. How does class and disability, how do they dovetail? Are there extra challenges?
Oh yeah. Class and disability. So I come from a working class background, and I think there was something about having to again, we've all gone to clinical psychology. We all want to go through a psychology pathway, and that requires you going above and beyond, trying to seek out opportunities, trying to get to the best that you can. And sometimes it can be a challenge because opportunities the opportunities don't come as freely for some people. Opportunities, you have to really go and search for them. It's not something that you can just look in a paper or do this. You really have to make contact. You really have to go and search for kind of allies and see if you can speak to someone else. And for me, that was a challenge in terms of I really felt that I had to go above and beyond, but equally there was something I had to go above and beyond and also prove that, yes, you might see my diagnosis on paper, but it does not mean that I'm not the same person, that I don't want the same thing. So I think it was a challenge in terms of, and everyone has conceptions or preconceptions of what an illness means and what that means for you. So it always felt for a long period of time that I had to always prove myself. And to this day, I still feel like I need to prove myself. They see that on paper, I have A, B, C, D, E. That means they have a pre-idea of what that could mean. And you have on the media and on internet, they have all these negativities about what an illness is, or often it's the worst case scenario. So you often have to prove to yourself or prove to employers, no, I'm very open. I will tell you when I need support. Please don't assume or judge me based on what you read in the paper. And that's my stance. I've never been defined by my disability. My disability is separate to who I am as a therapist. And I'm very open to talk about any support and what I need. So, but again, it's those open conversations I think is paramount, because the fact that I felt open telling them what I needed, what I didn't want, they were able to step back and say, fine, you be autonomous, you do what you need to do, just know that I'm here to support you if you did need me. And I think that's a nice, healthy way of being around it. But again, it comes from within. We have to be open and confident, accept and be comfortable knowing that we have a disability and be able to share and talk about that. Because if we can't talk about it, then it makes conversations around what you need a bit more difficult. So I hope I was able to answer that question.
Yeah. No, that's pretty comprehensive.
Very, very.
I think, oh, sorry, go on, Julie.
No, I was just going to say, we've got another question here saying, if you could give one piece of advice to your past self at the beginning of your journey through clinical psychology, what would it be?
Is that in regards to my disability then?
It doesn't really specify. So I guess that and you in general as a whole, kind of your past self just in general. If you could give one piece of advice, I guess looking back now, what would that be? It is, isn't it? It's a tough one as well.
I think for me, and I think everyone's gone through that journey of trying to get into clinical, and we know how competitive it is and we know how difficult it is, and there's something about feeling lucky to get on, you know. And I think for especially I was at that stage where I was very happy to talk about my hidden disability, because it was that started training that it was still hidden. But I felt like because I'd gone to training and I was a lucky one, I couldn't talk about it at the beginning because I was very worried and of what other people might think of me. I didn't want to be judged. So I didn't feel comfortable talking about it when I started training at the beginning. But by all means, that quickly shifted because I had a relapse, and then I was forced to talk about it. And then I kind of realized, why didn't I start that conversation earlier? Why did it have to wait for something to happen for me to seek help? Whereas if I'd just even told people about my disability beforehand, then that conversation of me seeking help wouldn't have been as difficult. So I think that is something that I've learned, but I don't think I'd go back and change it, because for me, it's in hindsight that you learn a lot, and that helps you shape your future and how you go about, and shapes what kind of things you want to do and how you want to start conversations. So I wouldn't change anything because I've learned so much about myself, about other people, and sort of challenge my own perceptions of what other people might think of disabilities. And interestingly enough, I think people are very open to talk about it. People are curious to find out how it affects me. The disability I have, it's very rare in people. So people want to know, oh, what was that like? Oh, you got diagnosed that age. That must have been very frightening. So actually, it was very nice and warming that people wanted to have share an interest of my lived experience with a disability. And I think the fact that I was very open, by all means, I'm very happy for people to talk about and ask me questions. In fact, I encourage it, because for me as a young child, you can imagine 10, 11, 12, no one knew, and it was very rare to have the disability that I had. So there was a lot of, I couldn't ask any questions. I was very curious as an individual, as a young child, to kind of be like, what does that mean to me? How will that affect my life? You know, what does that mean that I won't be able to do what I need to do? And I think one thing I learned is sharing is caring, sharing is powerful. We can't assume that people know about disabilities. They might have heard about a condition, but absolutely not. They don't know how it affects you. They don't know what impacts it's had on you. So by creating that space to talk about it, not only are you enriching your own knowledge and also comfort, but also other people's, so that if there was another person that may work with that same disability, they can draw an experience, say, oh, this person has it, this is how it affects them. How does it affect you? Is it the same way? But we need to be open to allow those conversations to be had in order to enhance and develop knowledge on disabilities. And also, again, to be able to mirror that we're able to cope with a disability, that we're able to go ahead with our life. And especially if we work in learning disabilities context, it will be quite hypocritical if we can't show that we're comfortable and we can talk about it, but yet expect our clients to do the same. We have to be the models. We have to mirror that, and we have to be a model for them to say, hi, I have a disability. Yes, a part of my identity, but absolutely not. You can do what you need to do. Don't let it affect you. And there's always going to be preconceptions. There's always going to be negativity. And yes, that I'm not going to fluff it over. It might happen, but there's something about you being comfortable and strong enough and building your resources to say, that's your perspective. This is how it affects me. And this is what I've got, you know? So I think more than anything, a take-home message is feel comfortable with that identity. It's something that we have, but absolutely it's definitely not a negativity. In fact, it gives us strengths and development and growth. And what's interesting, my last point, is the same perspective that I found when I got diagnosed at the age of 10, of the loss of that childhood because I had a disability. Interestingly, the same loss that I went through when I was 10 is the same loss I'm seeing now with COVID-19, of the change of perspectives, the change of priorities, the value in life. I realized that when I got diagnosed, when I lost that childhood, it put things into perspective, and it makes me appreciate and value what I do have, because we can't change anything, but we can absolutely make life as fulfilling as we can with a disability or with any sort of condition, long-term health condition. So I think it just helps you shape your perspective in life and see things from a different way, which makes you value the journey that you go through with a disability. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just kind of following on from that, kind of Rachel's asked, kind of just from the other side, I wonder what your advice would be around approaching someone who might not be so comfortable talking about their disability, you know?
I think there's a readiness. I think I've gone through, and it's like that pathway of having a hidden invisible disability to having a hidden voice disability, to now my current situation is to have a visible voice disability. I think everyone has to go through that pathway. I think everyone needs to feel ready and comfortable. Absolutely don't feel forced to talk about it, but start to think about talking with close friends or sharing with close friends about it. Maybe start really small steps. I'm not saying go on a big microphone and speak it to the world, but there's something about starting that pathway of talking and feeling comfortable talking about disability. And I think it will all fall into place after that. But I definitely think it's a readiness. I think when you start to feel ready and are able to talk about it to other people who are in your close-knit family or in your close circle, I think that would give you strength to start being open and talk about with outside of that circle. But I definitely think it's a readiness, but there is something about it starts from within. We have to feel comfortable and ready to talk about it before we can even start telling other people, because that would make that those conversations a bit more harder, especially when I start to ask you questions about it and you're not comfortable to talk about it.
Thank you so much for that. That was yeah, that was very comprehensive. Thank you. I've just got another question for you, if you don't mind. Coming from a working class background, what would you say were your biggest barriers in getting into the field, and how did you initially overcome this?
I think my biggest barrier was just knowing how to do it. I think it's we have an idea, and you hear about other people they know of clinical psychologists, or they know of other people who've done psychology, or they have links. For me, I started from scratch, and again, it started from applying NHS website and applying for assistant psychology jobs. And I'm not going to lie, I got knocked down several times, absolutely knocked down several times. But I think I just kept fighting. It's like you're in a ring and you're going to get knocked down in a fight. Yeah, even Mike Tyson can knock you down several times. But I think the strength and courage is to get back up and keep fighting. I think, and for me, I think that fight, that kind of push to keep going absolutely helped me to kind of, one day I got a job interview and I got the job, and that's when it started. But I think you need to keep going. I'm not going to fluff it over and say that it's an easy journey to get into clinical psychology, because it's absolutely not. It's absolutely not, but it's definitely not impossible. And it's keep going, but also take care of yourself, because we can get into this work mode of we drive ourselves to push ourselves further and further. But actually, with people with disability, that's a hindrance, because that makes illness harder. And sometimes for me, and my learning curve actually going back is to kind of listen to my body. When my body was telling me I was sick, just step back and listen, because it doesn't mean that I won't get to where I need to go. But there's no point trying to push yourself to reach the best that you can at the expense of your health, because actually the outcome will be much worse than anything else. So I wish, in going back to that question before, in terms of what I tell myself, it was just to listen to my body and be kind to myself, and don't feel pressured to do and get to where you need to go. And I understand how difficult that is, because psychology is a very competitive field. So you're on a wagon with other people who want to get to the same place as you. So you start to get on that wagon and keep running and going on. But the worst case scenario for you is when you get to that finish line, you're knackered. So what does that mean? Does that mean you're knackered and you can't go on any further? Actually, it's going back to say, fine, I'll walk to that finish line, but at least when I get to that finish line, I can continue going, walking, rather than me running to that finish line and me having to stop, which again means you might have to take a break, which again means that there might be delays in what you need to do. So it's those kind of perspectives, saying instead of me running, I will walk to the same finish line, but I just might get there a bit later, because I have to take care of me.
Thanks for that. I think we've got one last question from Hannah, which is, did you ever come across a situation where you felt discriminated against for your disability? And
absolutely.
If you did, how did you overcome that?
Absolutely. There were things. I remember having a job when I was in university, and a part-time job, and one person said I couldn't do A, B, C, D, E because I had this disability, so you need to sit down. I was just like, I'm sorry, where did that come from? You know, where do you get those ideas from? And I think for me, how I overcame it was, again, be open and say, no, this is my disability, this is what I can and cannot do. If I needed support, I will speak to you, I will tell you, I will seek help and say, no, I'm tired, or I can't walk right now, or I'm feeling really ill, I feel really weak. I will tell you. And I kind of spoke to my manager and said, please don't assume that this is what I can and cannot do based on what you've seen on my paper. Please listen to me. And when I feel I need support, or when I need further assistance, I will come to you. But please don't assume that I can't do that. I don't have the capacity or the ability to do that, because absolutely not. I can. And there's something about communication. It goes back to that point of, we need to be open and be able to communicate our strengths and our limitations and feel comfortable to say that this is what I can't do, or this is what I can do, but also be comfortable, because if we can't, again, it goes back to, if we can't create this open space where we can talk about our disability, then people will make assumptions, people will assume things, people have negative perceptions of what a disability means. And that openness to talk about it enables you to correct or challenge them, but equally enables other people to learn as well about what it's like to live with a disability.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Laura. Thank you. So that was the final question for Laura, at least for now. So we're just going to move on to our second speaker, who's Sophie. And Sophie gets to introduce herself.
Hi everyone. I did have a bit of a glitch before where my computer stopped working. So if I suddenly disappear, I'm assuming my internet will go out, and I'm hoping that you guys can kind of stall for me for a few minutes while I get back on. But hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm a second year trainee. And I thought today, very similar to Laura, I wanted to chat a little bit about my journey. And then I had a few reflections of things that I've been thinking about kind of in preparation for this webinar that I wanted to share as well and kind of put out there. And if it's interesting for you guys, then ask more questions. If not, then just for something for you to go away and mull over. But I guess to start with my journey, I was brought up in a very working class home. I was kind of grew up, can't get my words out, grew up on benefits. And at the age of about 13, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. And it was really challenging, and I can definitely see a lot of my journey in kind of what Laura said, especially in being diagnosed that young, that there was a massive loss of childhood for me, missing big chunks of school. University seemed like an absolute dream, not a possibility. You know, there was, at that stage in my life, I didn't think I'd be able to go back to school part-time, never mind hold a full-time job. Never mind hold a full-time job that's as blooming crazy as clinical psychology and training is sometimes. And I guess thinking about my journey into clinical psychology, I was really lucky that I was able to go to university. It was something that I always really wanted to do, and psychology just always interested me. And I got to uni and had an experience that I think a lot of people have had, which is someone coming to them and saying, this is what clinical psychology is, but don't bother trying to go for training because it's way too challenging and it's too much hard work, and you should go down an easier route. Which obviously, as someone who kind of did grow up with chronic illness, I've been told many times that, you know, this is beyond your capability, you know, aim lower. So being told that, I think, really gave me a bit of a kick, and it made me go, actually, you know what, I want to do this and I'm going to do it, even if it's, you know, through hell and high water. I'm going to try my absolute best to try and get to where I want to be. And I did. I worked my ass off, to be honest, at times, and it was so challenging. Because I was from a working class background, I had to work part-time at university to be able to afford to live, you know, to be able to afford to, you know, do anything that I wanted. And it was challenging, you know, trying to balance my physical health, my mental health, my ability on a day-to-day basis, and balance that with studying at undergraduate, working part-time as a support worker. And that alone was a challenge and was a bit of a transition period for me. And then I finished my undergraduate studies and was really kind of clear-cut on wanting to go into clinical psychology. And obviously, I think assistant psychologist posts are what a lot of people are drawn to. It's very much in the area of kind of what you want to do. It's a really great experience. And I tried for kind of probably about 6 months at the end of my undergraduate degree applying for assistant psychologist jobs, because I had to be really selective about what I was applying for. I couldn't afford to do an honorary post because if I didn't get paid, I wasn't going to eat, and that wasn't an option, sadly. You know, things like location, if I was going to move across the country, I had to know that I had enough money to be able to do that. I had to think about my support if and when I did do that. What would I have if I did have a relapse, if I did find myself really ill again? And, you know, I think these are just all the questions that a lot of people don't have to think about. And it's these barriers that I think are invisible that crop up time and time again that just make those little things much harder. So I ended up working as a support worker for a year because it was much easier to get a support worker role, but that meant that I was working 15-hour shifts, and physically for that year, I got great experience that I think really contributed to getting onto the doctorate. But I barely had a life. I was physically, all I could manage was working. I'd go to work and I'd come home and sleep. And occasionally a few of my friends would come around and we'd sit on the sofa, because that was all I had the capacity to do at that time. And I think that's something that I've noticed a lot through my journey, is that with each new stage of the journey, there was a transition period where I had to really think in my head, okay, how much capacity do I have to do this job or do this part of study or study and this work? And where does everything else fall in line with that? Where's my time to be a friend, to have, be a daughter, to have all of those other things in life that are important, that can really, I found, fall through the cracks, because I was so determined to get onto this career that I put my priorities into those experiences and that work, which, I don't regret at this point. But actually, I think, thinking about what Laura mentioned, that I was really beating myself up and pushing myself to, get on this career as fast as possible, without really taking much care to look after myself. And then I guess thinking about when I did start the doctorate, actually, I think I had this pipe dream that, getting onto the doctorate was the challenge. It was being an assistant psychologist. It was working, doing all that grunt work until you get onto the doctorate and suddenly you're there. And I started the doctorate, and suddenly, it came out of left field and slapped me around the side of the head. And I was like, oh, now I've got to do the doctorate. Now I've got to do 3 years of juggling clinical work, academic work, teaching, research, eating, sleeping, looking after myself, all of those things. And I was absolutely gobsmacked at how much I had to transition last year, how much support I had to see, in a way that I've always been tried to be really open and honest about my illness and my limitations and my capacity, what I can and can't do. But I think starting the doctorate, I had to take that to a whole nother level. I had to be honest on a day-to-day basis with supervisors. Some days I'd walk in and say, yeah, I have the capacity to do everything today. Some days I'd walk in and say, look, my capacity is way down here, and we need to think about how I can do what I need to do, but also look after myself. And I realised that I'm probably running out of my 10 minutes, so I'll stop on my journey, but feel free to ask me more questions. The last two kind of just small reflections that I wanted to bring up, and I will try and be quick. The first one is that I think we can get really stuck on the barriers that come with being working class, with having a disability or illness or any kind of disadvantage, anything to overcome. But something I've been reflecting on more recently is actually some of the strengths that I think I've developed because of the experiences that I've had. In order to look after myself physically, I have to be incredibly reflective. I constantly have to have that little bit in the back of my brain going, how are you feeling today? What's going on for you? Are you okay? What do you need? And that's a tool that I utilize so much in my work, both in the therapy room with my clients, thinking in the back of my head, how am I reacting to this session? How can I use my emotional or whatever response I'm having to feed into my formulation? But also just in terms of being able to manage training whilst remaining a human being, which might be a very weird way to put it, but I think there's something about starting training that you become a trainee, that's what you are. You've worked so hard to get there, and all you want to do is just be the best trainee. We've got the imposter syndrome, we've got, I had a lot of guilt about earning more than my parents. All of these things are coming up, and being very stuck in this idea that I have to be a trainee, I have to do amazing. If everyone realises that I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth, they're going to kick me off, and this will have all been for nothing. And I think more recently, actually, I've been able to look back and say that having to be organised, having to be reflective, having to ask for help, all of these skills are so important in our career because we've chosen a really hard job. And I think actually I've developed a lot of those through having to look after myself. And I guess finally, kind of a bit of a given one is, understanding clients. Sometimes clients will come in and they'll have, whether it's a similar kind of physical disability or illness, whether it's, a long-standing mental health condition. I think having those experiences yourself really helps you understand who's sat in front of you, and you definitely bring in different things to the room, I think. And then, sorry, I realised I just said finally, but I have one last really quick point, which is that I think this year has been rubbish. that's a given. Not even going to try and sugarcoat it. But there's something about the way that actually this year we've adapted to flexible working. We've had to. And I think it's definitely sparked a little bit of hope for me that in the future, actually, as a profession, we can integrate more of this flexible working to be more inclusive, to allow people who can't work a traditional 9 to 5 or be in an office for a traditional 9 to 5 to be able to be a part of the career in a really meaningful way. But I will kind of stop monologuing now and give you guys a chance to butt in with some questions.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Sophie. I know for me, just hearing about disabled students who've been asking for years for like webcams to be set up, and they were always told, no, this can't happen. And people dropped out courses, and then suddenly a pandemic happens, it affects everyone, and it happens overnight, you know?
Yeah.
Just a question kind of following up from what you mentioned about imposter syndrome. Someone's asked, sorry, Hannah's asked, did you ever feel that being working class led you to feeling imposter syndrome?
Most definitely. I think even to the point of my undergraduate degree, I felt like an imposter because the majority of the people I was surrounded by were from a very different background than me. I remember hearing that people came to university for Freshers' Week to get drunk, to have a great fun 3 years. And I remember thinking, what on earth? You're spending tens of thousands of pounds to go on a night out. That's madness. And I think even more so kind of getting more into the clinical psychology profession, actually, people have a lot very different experiences. And I think being working class does, you know, when you're from a working class background, or at least in my experience, I felt that I got put down a lot. I kind of touched on it, that a lot of people said, you can't do that. You're aiming too high, aim a bit lower. And I think that really fed into, actually, even once I was on the doctorate, it's only been in the past few months that I've stopped second guessing every decision that I've been making. And actually, I stop and go, no, you do deserve to be here. You know, tell yourself that, because no one else is necessarily going to tell you that. But yeah, for a year I was going, they're going to find me out. If I make one mistake, they're going to go, oh, you're not the Sophie that we meant to let in. Off with you. Luckily, it's not happened yet.
Thank you so much for that, Sophie. I've got another question for you. So someone just wanted you to clarify. So did you get on as an assistant psychologist? So basically, were you an assistant psychologist before you got onto your training, or did you kind of stay as a support worker and then got onto training?
I never got an assistant psychology job. I must have applied for, I'd say, in the hundreds at the end of the day. And I think I got one interview, and my feedback was, we very almost gave you the job, but someone came in and they had just a bit more experience than you. So I tried really hard to get an AP job because I thought that was the way to get onto training. But actually, now looking back on it, I think it is true that it's not what you do, it's what you learn from what you do. And I think you can get just as rich and important experience as a support worker. It's about those people skills. It's about being able to listen and understand people. And if you can reflect on whatever it is you're doing, that's really important. So yeah, I am living proof that you do not need to be an AP to get onto training.
Sorry, Martina's just got another imposter syndrome question. So she's asked, did you ever feel like you didn't belong on the course? Like all the other trainees were so much better?
Yeah, definitely. I think even now, sometimes I still get glimpses of that. And I've spoken to so many qualified clinical psychologists who say the same thing. They say, I don't know what I'm doing. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing a bit more than me. Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I know that people who on my cohort who haven't come from a working class background have told me that they feel the same. I don't think it's exclusive to people from working class backgrounds or people with, any kind of disadvantage or disability, but I think it's just heightened a bit more for us because it's something we faced probably a lot more, in a lot more quantity and, more often than maybe other people, or that's at least my interpretation of it. But yeah, I still feel like that, but sometimes it's about stopping and reminding yourself that there's not always someone else there to give you a bit of a pat on the back and say, yeah, you're doing a good job. And actually, you have to remind yourself of that. And if you're living with a chronic illness or disability and you're getting up and you've got a job, or you're even getting up and brushing your teeth sometimes, moving from the bed to the sofa, giving yourself a pat on the back for all of that, because it's all incredibly important to look after yourself and tell yourself that you're doing awesome at whatever your capacity is, whenever that is. Sorry, a bit of a ramble there.
No, thank you. Thanks so much, Sophie. Thank you. We've just got a few comments here, just kind of people just saying thank you, that they've been trying to get AP posts for a while and they haven't. So it's kind of good having that reassurance that, you know, the AP isn't kind of gold standard after all. You can still get onto the doctorate without that. I've just got another question for you, and it says, how many times did you apply to the doctorate, and did you consider giving up at some point?
So I was incredibly lucky. I actually only applied for the doctorate once. And I say lucky, I realise that probably sounds a bit counterintuitive after saying that we should give ourselves a pat on the back. But I do honestly believe that the doctorate application, yes, a big chunk of it is skill, but a massive chunk of it is luck, because no matter how wonderful you are, there's probably at least 50 other people who are just as experienced, just as passionate. You know, people who get into clinical psychology, I think, are generally wonderful people. You know, I meet a lot of incredibly passionate, caring people who work really hard. So yeah, I think there were times I wanted to give up, less because of the kind of traditional application process and trying and kind of, you know, getting rejections and coming back and two, but the amount of times that I stopped and said, actually, can I handle this? Can I be a clinical psychologist? Am I aiming too high? Do I have the physical ability to do that? And even now, sometimes I stop and ask myself that after a really tough week, when I get home and collapse in a heap and I need the whole weekend to recover, I stop and go, is this the right path? Am I trying too hard? But I think if you're really passionate about it, if it's what you want to do, then yeah, you're going to have to face rejection, whether it's 100 rejections from AP jobs or trying for the doctorate 3 or 4 years in a row and getting those rejections. That rejection is part and parcel of this role. And unfortunately, it's something that you do have to kind of learn to accept, live with, you know, not necessarily be okay with, but just, you know, it comes and goes. And I think it's important, if it is what you want to do, to hold that in mind and hold in mind the reasons and what values you hold that make you want to do that, because you can find other ways along that journey to live out those values, whether that's being a support worker or volunteering, or, you know, even just with friends and family, living in line with some of those values of being compassionate or whatever it is. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Sophie. Thank you. Did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I think just one last quick question before we take a break. Someone's asked, if you can remember, was there anything on your application you think particularly set you apart?
Honestly, I don't think so. From what I can remember, I think I really approached the application process with a mindset of, honestly, my mindset was, this is my first year applying. There's no way I'm going to get on this year. So let's have a bit of fun with it. Let's actually say what I want to say and not what I think people want to hear. So my application, I did speak about my personal lived experience. And the same in my interview, that actually I was really open throughout the whole process of, if, you know, these courses don't want me, because I am open and willing to say, actually, I have these experiences and I think it's really important to talk about them, then they're not the courses that I want to be on. So yeah, I think I would say, yes, you do have to tick the boxes of the application process, but show who you are in that, because there's, as I said before, there's hundreds of people who have plenty of experience and the skill and the academic requirements. Show who you are in that, because at the end of the day, you're a person as well as a clinical psychologist, and I think it is your personal experiences that shine through and that you can really hold on to be good at this job in many ways, not just in the therapeutic work, but, you know, as working as part of a team, all the other aspects. I think I would definitely say follow your passions and follow, kind of, be yourself, because that's what we need more of. We don't want robot clinical psychologists. We want real human beings who can come into this profession and ask questions or have those conversations that other people aren't having.
Okay. Thanks for that, Sophie.
Yeah.
Shall we take a quick break and come back at 8 o'clock, if that kind of suits people? That sounds right? Okay. See you all then.
Right, everyone, welcome back. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you so much for sticking with us, guys. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce our third speaker then. Can't see any more questions for Sophie, so I'm going to introduce our third speaker. I'm going to introduce Kath, and she can introduce herself when she comes on.
Hello, I'm Kate.
Oh, sorry, Kate.
No, don't worry. Oh, that's fine. And I suppose gosh, it's been so great to hear everybody speaking tonight. I suppose some of the thoughts that I had when I was asked to speak tonight were very much along the lines of everyone else, thinking about my journey and what in that journey might be helpful to share for people who might have visible or invisible difference. And I suppose thinking a little bit about where to start with that was the question. And I suppose I thought that it might be helpful just to tell you a little bit about me and my journey. And then at the end of that, if you've got any questions, that would be absolutely grand to answer them. I work as a psychologist. I was born with cerebral palsy, and that comes along with some visible and invisible difference. So visibly, I walk to my own beat, and invisibly, I take a bit longer than others to think things out. And I suppose that has really influenced who I am as a human being, how I move through the world, how I'm positioned in society, and what I've decided to do with my life. I suppose one of my biggest journeys with cerebral palsy has been in relation to, at a very young age, learning the difference between how I perceived myself and how my family and those who loved me perceived me, and the way society in general tends to, initially at least, perceive disability. So my family, I was raised in a working class single parent home by a mum who had a background as a special needs teacher, but when Ireland went through some hard times in the 80s, it was tough to find jobs, and she worked as a support worker with people with disabilities. And she supported a lady, Mairead Manton, who also had cerebral palsy, who became a disability activist and a poet in Ireland. And it was only, she's a lady who was part of a lot of the key events in my life, because she was very much part of our family, because her and my mum became very close. And it was only really after, when she passed away a few years ago, that I looked back from the perspective of being a psychologist, and considered what an influential role she really had on my the way that I viewed myself and the way I viewed my position in the world. I suppose when I was a child, because of the context I was raised in, I was very sure that I could do anything that you or anyone else could do, but I just needed to go about it a little bit differently. And that was cool with me, because it was cool with my family, and it was the way I had always done things. But then I met the world, and the world kind of didn't look at stuff that way. So the world was very much like, oh, sorry, sorry, you don't do things exactly the same as me. And the world was quite panicked about that and made me recognise that that was quite distinct from the way everyone else did it. And I have some key early memories of walking alongside my mum when at a very young age I was wearing a cast. And I can remember chatting away to my mum, and then a lady saying to my mum, "Oh God, sure, isn't she great? Isn't she just, oh God, she's such an inspiration." And I can remember at a young age starting to feel quite cross, you know. You haven't really learned how to be, I was young enough not to yet have a sense of correcting that feeling of myself. I can remember my cheeks, feeling that my cheeks were starting to get red. And I can remember saying to my mum, within earshot of the lady, I have to say, "Why did she say that?" And my mum said, "Oh, she was just trying to be nice." And I can remember that struggle and not knowing why that didn't sit right with me. But it was one of my many introductions to the fact that the way I saw myself was not the lens through which I was going to be viewed by society. And I suppose that kind of is one of the struggles that with a disability you face when it comes to getting onto training and going through training, and as a newly qualified psychologist, which is that distinct difference between how you are viewed by society, what their expectations of you are because of your disability, what your abilities are, and how you go about things in a world that is although I know that I can do things, I just need to do them a bit differently. I'm in a world, that is really not ready for me to even try to do things a little bit differently. It is not ready and able with the adaptations that would be really helpful in order to support people who do things a little bit differently to do exactly that. So what happens is, when you try to go about things a little bit differently, you come up against a number of barriers, and what I found is in the face of those barriers, I needed to find my own voice. Because if I wasn't going to do that as I got older, when my family wasn't around to advocate for me, I was a very, very, very quiet, gentle child. But if I didn't learn how to find my voice for myself, the world was going to run roughshod over me, because it wasn't ready and able with those adaptations. Now, some of that is that, as the ladies earlier were saying, if the world doesn't know you need things to be done a little bit differently, it can't help you out. But another part of that is that even when you ask for adaptations, the responses that you get when you request those adaptations, it can be more of a fight than you're expecting. Fortunately, I found great strength in the community that my family had naturally surrounded me with, which was a group of very strong women in my own family, but also we had there was no bashfulness in us about involving me in activities that got me friendly with other people with cerebral palsy, some of whom I'm still friends with today. And we, among ourselves, were able to have conversations that were just illuminating to me about we were able to suddenly laugh about the fact that we had to approach life in a different way. And we were able to explore the challenges we were all facing and then discuss the ways we were finding around them. And that really gave me the confidence to start finding my voice when I needed to do that. For example, when I was applying to training, I found applying to training to be a long road. Again, I needed to do things a little bit differently. What I found hard was when you're facing a new challenge, you don't always know how you need to adapt in a new setting. So you can't always speak up about what you need. But what I found helpful was to talk to people who knew me well, who had worked with me, who could recognise my strengths, and also who could talk to me openly about some of the adaptations they had noticed and that I had benefited from. And so I suppose that's one thing I would say to other people, is get advice from the people in the profession who know you best. I suppose another way I found my voice is through speaking up for others, and recognising my value in a world that didn't always seem to. On the journey to apply for training, there was no way I could have done a full-time voluntary AP role. That just wasn't an opportunity. That wasn't something that I could do financially. And I suppose, so I did the same. I worked 12-hour shifts, and I used to do 14 days on, 1 day off, so that I could actually afford to pay my rent. So I suppose that is a big challenge in terms of the opportunities that you don't get, that people who have a bit more money behind them will be able to avail of. You don't get to decide that you want to go to Australia for a year. You decide you want to get onto clinical psychology, and you want to pay the bills. So you work as a support worker, and if you get opportunities, then to work under the supervision of a psychologist along your way, that can be really helpful. What I found is that being a person with a disability in the world often seems like you can never do enough, because often you're doing the best that you can and you're exhausted, and it's not as much as maybe people who don't need things to be adapted for them, because you are dealing with a world which is not adapted for you. And I suppose so being kind to yourself along that journey is very important, and I very much carried that onto training with me. The idea of being kind to myself about what I could do, and recognising that what I could do was enough, even if it wasn't. For example, I found that when I was on training, I needed to work in the evenings during the week to get stuff done. But my self-care within that might look a little different to somebody else who might be able to take off every weekday and just work at the weekends. But I can still put my self-care in there. So I can say, I am going to work in the evenings, but I'm going to work for an hour each evening. And you know what? I'm going to end by taking a bath or doing something that I enjoy, like watching a movie. So finding a way that works for you to have a bit of self-care is really, really helpful indeed. And I also found that, again, talking to people with a disability to find out what support is possible was really good for me, because I don't think it was hard to know coming on the doctorate what support I would need. And it was only when I was facing the challenges of the doctorate that it became apparent to me what additional support I would need. I found it very vulnerable. Everybody has very clearly spoken tonight about speaking up when you need something. I think that is so important. I also think it's really hard to do at times. I found that very vulnerable at times, because you don't know how what you're saying is going to be taken. You don't know if it's going to be taken, oh, this is too much for Kate, and it's a very vulnerable conversation to have, especially because sometimes, whether or not you are the only person asking for additional support, and you're probably not, it can often seem that way, because we will often talk openly about our successes, but we don't often have those safe spaces to talk about the things we're finding challenging. I was very fortunate on my training that we had a very supportive cohort, and I had some close friends with whom we could just be really open about our vulnerabilities, and it was an invaluable support through training to be able to laugh at some of the challenges that we faced, as well as just to hear each other out when things were really frustrating, and also just to feel like to feel understood in the challenges you're facing. So the support of friends and family can't be underestimated. And also, I made a key decision when I got into training that anywhere I applied, I'd make sure that I had close friends, and that I wasn't applying to anywhere I didn't know anyone, because that support network was invaluable in getting through training. And my entire journey through training was longer, because some stuff just takes me longer. So there was I find that there's a continual, I think I've accepted that things are going to take me longer, and then I get really frustrated and want to throw my laptop out a window, and I realize I have to have a conversation with myself again about accepting that some things just take me so bloody long. So sometimes it's a journey, self-acceptance. It's also okay with, you can be very driven. It can be part of what gets you onto this program. It's okay to reflect on that a little bit, because it's also a really quick way to get burnt out in our profession. And it's okay to have conversations. It's good to have at least one friend who's able to say to you, it's okay to leave at 5 o'clock. And to think about self-care when you qualify, because the pressure and the feeling of not being good enough does not go away. Does not go away. There was this beautiful, and I think when you do things differently, there's quite a fear about not being good enough, but it can be helpful to remember that most newly qualifieds are out there thinking, I'm definitely not good enough. Jesus, why are they putting me in a newly qualified role? I definitely need like a year longer. If I could just have one more year, maybe of CAT specialist training or of CBT training, I would definitely be ready, but I'm not ready just yet. So maybe just thinking that we're not alone in that feeling, just might be feeling that about different things. I suppose having a disability has absolutely influenced who I am as a human being. And it's a part of my identity I'm very proud of, because it lets me take a different perspective on things. I'm okay to think things out critically. I'm okay to say what I think when it's not what everybody else in the room is thinking. That helps me as a psychologist, because it means that in MDT meetings, I'm able to say something maybe that's not being said. It makes me strengths focused in my work with young people who are going through struggles. Because I recognise how easy when you're going through struggles it is not to recognise the strengths that you have that are carrying you through those struggles. I'm also very determined, and I have a huge passion for social justice, which I think anyone who's had to do something differently is only so aware of the challenges that everybody in society faces, and how can we possibly address those challenges. That very much influenced the kind of role that I wanted to go into as a psychologist. I think I'll just end by saying that I think psychologists with disability, I think by being who we are, it's kind of exciting, because we get to redefine how society sees disability just by being who we are and being authentic and true to ourselves. And so I'll end on that, and any questions that you have are very welcome.
Oh gosh, thanks for that, Kate. It's just like woof, I'm just still taking it all in, to be honest. We do have a question, and anyone else, just feel free to type them in the chat box. How did you find asking for adaptations or support while you're doing your training?
So I think because I had asked for adaptations at undergrad and in secondary school, and I'd asked for adaptations, then going through the process of asking for adaptations, I came on with the idea that I would be going to disability services and asking for adaptations. I think that makes the conversation easier. What I did find was I was fortunate in that I had a very supportive tutor on the course who very much just wanted to find what adaptations were going to make it possible for me to reach my potential. That was really helpful, and it was especially helpful. I had never had to reassess a disability plan before. I'd always known what I needed, and then the course decided it was going to be a monstrous ask, and I needed to reassess what I needed. That I did find that a challenge, and it helped that I had a good relationship with my personal tutor. It also helped to talk it out with people, with close friends and with family who knew me well, who could help me see that this is true. It may sound off the wall, but it's true that what I was asking for was reasonable, because I still have those questions sometimes. Can I ask for this adaptation? Which must sound to people without a disability like it doesn't make any sense, but you do have those questions because continually from society you're getting the message of, oh God, do we need to adapt something? And you do have that social, that party that wants to please, and it's like, oh no, please don't go to any bother. Am I putting you to bother? So what really helps is talk to people who love and know you well. And that can be a step towards talking to people more formally about what you might need. And do ask for it. Ask for it. Ask for what you feel you need, because absolutely it made the difference between it's made it possible for me to get to this point, having those adaptations.
Gosh, no, thanks so much for that, Kate. I can't see any other questions in the chat box. I think normally we end just by bringing the panel together, and if there are any kind of questions you want to put to them as a group, we can do that.
Kate, I think you have a few interested people for you as a supervisor, so you might have some a list of people interested in having you for some supervision. Thank you very much. That was really lovely.
No worries.
Yeah, but if there aren't any questions coming up, I wonder if I could ask one. Just regarding what Kate was saying about dealing with a world that isn't particularly shaped for you. Do you feel that's been easier inside or outside of the profession?
I don't know what everyone else feels, but I suppose I feel that it's probably easier now because I'm more experienced at it. I don't know whether that's that I'm in the profession or that I'm more used to it. I do think we are more open to having conversations about difference, and that the world has become increasingly open to adapting to individuals' needs, which I think is so important, that the world recognises that with or without disability, we're all unique human beings who sometimes need a bit of adaptation. We need to do things a little bit differently to give our best.
Sophie, Laura, do you have any thoughts?
Thank you, Kate. That was really interesting for me to hear, thinking about kind of once you've qualified and the differences from training. And I think from my point of view, I have been incredibly lucky so far, and in the clinical psychology profession, people have been really open to listen to me and take the time to understand, what do I need, how can I help you, and ask those really important questions. And I found it incredibly welcoming, and it's made me feel like, actually, yes, maybe I have picked the right career. I think I had a lot of negative experiences in work before, kind of in non-psychology related posts. But I think something that really struck me as Kate was talking is that even within the clinical psychology profession, we are part of wider systems, and those wider systems are often the places where those barriers can come up. Like Kate said, it was the university and kind of the bigger university policies that it sounded like made it quite difficult for you in getting a support plan in place. And I think, you know, the NHS is wonderful, but it's a big system, and sometimes you can have great individual kind of lower level support, but when you're trying to get your needs met in a bigger way, that actually once you get to the wider system, that's when you can kind of find a lot of red tape, and it can get very frustrating. But I think it's really important that you do have to advocate for yourself and find those people who are going to advocate with you and for you in situations where you don't feel able to be an advocate, especially as a trainee, because sometimes I feel incredibly powerless, and it's really helpful to have an incredibly supportive tutor who can be that voice for me when maybe I don't feel like I can be that voice. Yeah.
Thank you both for that. Thank you. Kate, I've just got a question for you in the comment. Sorry, I've lost it. Oh, there we go. How did you find your cohort reacted to your disability? Well, I guess I can throw this open to everyone, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, my personal experience was that my cohort were incredibly supportive and yeah, very open. One of the adaptations that I needed at one point in the course was to use a dictaphone or a recorder when I was in lectures, and my cohort were lovely and supportive about that, because of course part of that might mean that if they were asking a question, that would be recorded on my device. Do you know what I mean? But there was no question, but that they were very supportive of that. And I think I wondered how I always wonder how it will be taken that I don't drive, and that's part of my my disability, because of my disability. And I suppose I always wondered if there would come a point where people in my cohort might be annoyed, because it did mean that I got placements that were convenient for me to travel to on public transport, and there was never a whisper of that. It was more well, that makes sense, which was incredibly supportive, and I found the course to be incredibly supportive of anything that I requested as well. So yeah, I had an incredibly positive experience of supporting me to reach my potential through the course, I have to say, and very much my cohort were a big part of that.
I can absolutely second that. And I can share the same experience with you. Sorry, I lost connection for a bit. In terms of adaptations, my course was amazing. So for me, walking long journeys is difficult. Driving long journeys is extremely difficult. And I had a fruitful experience in terms of I had very supportive supervisors who would give me the closest placements, or even actually go above and beyond and take placements from other places to accommodate me. So I'm in London, and there might be places in other areas that wasn't a London-based university that they were able to liaise with them and say, this is a person who needs a placement close to the home. Are you able to accommodate? And I think it was very nice and lovely to hear and to witness that other universities appreciated and were able to accommodate the placements, even though it meant that another person may not be able to get that. And that was a lovely experience. And again, that helped with the communication and the ability for you to openly speak about the adjustments that you need, because the course that you were speaking to understood and they're able to support you. So that also eased the conversations of seeking help to say, I'm sorry, I can't make this placement because it's too far. What are my options? And that enabled those discussions to be had, and those kind of, we have a placement in ABC. Is that all right for you? Or do you need something else? Or the placement doesn't necessarily have this ability, this access for you. Is that something we need to consider, or are you able to do it? So we're able to have those conversations rather than feel that I was forced to go into a placement, and then that would be a very unhelpful experience for me. So absolutely, I think having allies within your course, having friendships to support you, even having friendships or representatives to be there for you, because sometimes talking about situations makes you quite vulnerable and it can be difficult to have those conversations, but having support to say, oh, do you want me to be with you during that time? Or is this something that you would like me to talk to cohort? If for instance, I had an illness, or I was sick, or I needed to leave early, or I was away for 2 weeks because I was really ill, it was lovely to have cohorts to say, oh, I'm happy to take lectures for you. I'm happy to tell the university or the cohorts that this is the situation, but how much do you want me to tell them? Do you want me to tell them everything, or do you want me to just tell them a bit? So it's nice to have those conversations. I apologise in advance if you hear my little girl in the background. But they kind of help with having those conversations, and also your experiences of having a disability, because it can make you quite vulnerable. You do have those vulnerabilities of things that you can't do, you can do. So one, it's hard for you to accept that sometimes, but even harder to kind of share that and say, I need support. So yeah, I think making a space where you can have those conversations makes it easier, not just for you, but for everyone else as well.
I also completely agree. My cohort and course have been incredibly supportive, and it's what makes it possible, I think.
Okay, I think we don't have any other questions in the chat box. I just wondered if you guys had any questions for each other.
I don't think I've got any questions, but it's been, oh, sorry, Laura.
No, go ahead.
I think it's just been incredible to hear both of you speak, and I feel incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to have this conversation and have people want to listen and get involved, and it gives me such hope for our profession that these conversations can happen. And yeah, just thank you for letting me be involved, and thank you for letting me listen to you guys and your incredible thoughts and reflections.
And I second that. I think this is an amazing opportunity to kind of share and talk about the kind of challenges in life, but equally the fruits that we've been able to absorb, the learning, the development. I think that's the beauty about being able to share with other people and to relate with other people, that it's a learning curve, but equally to know that you're not alone, that we all have some form of disability or some form of health condition, and we're not alone. And for a long period of time, there was a taboo about talking about disabilities. But I think if we're able to have more spaces like these to talk about what it's like to live with a disability, the impact, but equally share the learning that we've learned, I think it makes us quite a courageous group of individuals for us to be able to reflect on the challenges, the positives, but equally laugh about them as well, to say, you know what, I had a crap experience that time. I did this A, B, C, D, but I can laugh about it because I think we do need to laugh about it because yes, there are challenges, but there are some positives that comes out of it. And I think laughter helps you to grow and develop through that. So I want to thank you for the opportunity for me to share my experiences with everyone, and also the opportunity to listen to you guys' experience as well of what it's like, because we do have similarities, but there are differences, and sometimes we need to acknowledge that, but also be mindful that there is life and we will get through it.
You know, I would just I so agree with everything that's just been said. Just thank you so much for the opportunity to come along and share my experience, but also to hear your experiences as well. I found it incredibly empowering as well, because I think it reminds me that that we are out there, those of us with visible and invisible differences, and in our quiet ways, we are making a difference in the lives of others by living with difference ourselves, and the unique perspectives that can give us on life. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, well, I can't think of a better note on which just to end the evening, actually. And just to thank everyone who's kind of turned up, thank everyone who's been chatting away on the chat box or Twitter. Thank you to Julie for facilitating with me. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.